Dragon Hatchling Story, Part 1. The emergency klaxons screamed through the corridors of Research Station Omega-7, their piercing wail echoing off the metal walls like a death knell. Dr. Marcus Chen pressed his back against the cold bulkhead, his breath coming in short gasps as he listened to the heavy footsteps of the Zephyrian security team thundering past his hiding spot. All human personnel report to evacuation pods immediately. The station commander's voice crackled over the intercom, barely audible above the chaos. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Marcus clutched his research tablet closer to his chest, the device containing 3 years of behavioral studies that could change everything humanity thought they knew about the galaxy's apex predators, the Drachnari, dragon-like beings that had terrorized civilizations across 17 star systems, leaving nothing but ash and silence in their wake. But Marcus had discovered something the Galactic Council refused to believe. Something that could either save countless lives or get him executed for treason against the established order. The corridor fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Marcus peered around the corner, his heart hammering against his ribs. The way to Laboratory Bay 12 was clear, but for how long? The Zephyrian forces had been ordered to destroy all research related to the Drachnari project before abandoning the station. 3 years of work, gone in a matter of hours. He sprinted down the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the station's dampening systems. The laboratory doors hissed open as he approached, revealing the sterile white chamber that had become his second home. Banks of monitoring equipment lined the walls, their screens flickering with data streams he'd spent countless nights analyzing. But it wasn't the equipment that drew his attention. In the center of the room, behind a wall of reinforced transparent aluminum, 3 small forms huddled together on a bed of synthetic moss, the Drachnari hatchlings. They were no bigger than house cats, their scales shimmering between deep emerald and midnight black. Their eyes, large and intelligent, tracked his movement with an awareness that sent chills down his spine. According to every textbook in the galaxy, these creatures should be mindless killing machines, driven by instinct to destroy anything that wasn't their own kind. Yet for 3 months, they had shown behaviors that defied everything the scientific community believed about their species. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, his voice catching in his throat. "I tried to convince them. I tried to show them the data." The largest of the 3 hatchlings, the one he'd secretly named Apollo, tilted its head and made a soft, chirping sound. Not the terrifying roar of legend, but something almost concerned. Marcus had discovered that the hatchlings possessed complex emotional responses, problem-solving abilities that rivaled some sentient species, and most shocking of all, they had begun to form what could only be described as an attachment to him. They recognized his voice, responded to his presence, and had even started mimicking some of his behaviors. The implications were staggering. If the Drachnari weren't the mindless destroyers they were believed to be, if they possessed genuine intelligence and emotional depth, then the galaxy's approach to dealing with them was not just wrong, it was genocide. The explosion rocked the station, sending Marcus stumbling against the observation panel. Emergency lighting bathed the laboratory in an eerie red glow as the main power systems began failing one by one. He had minutes at most before the Zephyrian demolition charges turned this place into cosmic debris. "Computer, Emergency Protocol 77 Alpha," Marcus commanded, his voice steadier than he felt. "Emergency Protocol initiated," the station's AI responded. "Warning. This action will permanently disable containment systems. Are you certain you wish to proceed?" Marcus looked at the 3 hatchlings who had moved closer to the barrier between them. Their eyes reflected the red emergency lighting, but there was no aggression in their posture. If anything, they seemed to sense his distress. "Execute protocol." The containment field shimmered and died. The transparent aluminum barrier retracted into the floor with a soft hiss. For the first time in 3 months, nothing stood between Marcus and 3 members of the galaxy's most feared predator species. Every instinct screamed at him to run. Every training manual, every horror story passed down through generations of spacers, every military briefing he'd ever attended told him that he was about to die in the most gruesome way imaginable. Instead, Apollo stepped forward and gently touched Marcus's outstretched hand with the tip of his snout. The contact was electric, not painful, but profound. Marcus felt a flood of emotions that weren't his own. Confusion, fear, but underneath it all, something that felt remarkably like affection. The hatchling was trying to comfort him. "My God," Marcus breathed. "You're not monsters at all, are you?" Another explosion, much closer this time. Debris rained from the ceiling and several monitoring stations sparked and died. The evacuation pods would be launching soon, with or without him. Marcus made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Instead of fleeing to safety, he gathered his research data and prepared to take the 3 hatchlings with him. If the Galactic Council wouldn't listen to his reports, perhaps they would listen to living proof. But as he moved toward the emergency escape pod hidden behind the laboratory's maintenance panel, the 3 hatchlings didn't follow. They remained in the center of the room, looking between Marcus and something he couldn't see. "Come on," he urged, patting his leg as he might call a pet. "We have to go now." Apollo chirped again, but instead of moving toward Marcus, he moved toward a sealed chamber at the far end of the laboratory. A chamber Marcus had been forbidden to access during his entire time on the station. The hatchlings knew something he didn't. Something important enough that they were willing to risk their lives to show him. As the station shuddered around them and time ran out, Marcus realized that his discovery was only the beginning. The real secret of the Draknari was still waiting to be uncovered, hidden behind doors that powerful forces had gone to great lengths to keep sealed. The question was, would he live long enough to reveal the truth? Dragon Hatchling Story, Part 2. The sealed chamber's control panel flickered with dying power as Marcus stumbled toward it. The 3 hatchlings pressed close to his legs. Their small claws clicked against the metal flooring, and he could feel the vibrations of their rapid heartbeats through their scales. Apollo looked up at him with those impossibly intelligent eyes, then back at the sealed door, as if urging him to understand something crucial. Marcus's fingers trembled as he accessed the emergency override codes. As the station's lead xenobiologist, he had clearance for most restricted areas. But this particular chamber had been classified above his security level since the day he arrived. The Zephyrian High Command had made it clear that certain aspects of the Draknari research were beyond his need to know. The heavy blast door groaned as ancient hydraulics forced it open, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with equipment Marcus didn't recognize. The air that rushed out carried a strange, sweet scent that made his nostrils flare. The hatchlings immediately became more agitated, their small bodies trembling with what could only be described as excitement. As Marcus stepped into the chamber, emergency lighting strips activated, illuminating walls covered with strange symbols and star charts. But it wasn't the alien writing that made his breath catch in his throat. It was the massive egg-shaped pod in the center of the room. The pod was easily 3 meters tall, its surface covered in the same bioluminescent patterns Marcus had observed on mature Draknari in combat footage. Soft blue light pulsed beneath its translucent shell in a rhythm that reminded him disturbingly of a heartbeat. Equipment surrounded the pod, life support systems, monitoring devices, and what appeared to be some kind of communication array. "This is impossible," Marcus whispered, approaching the pod with scientific curiosity overriding his fear. "The Draknari don't lay eggs this size." The largest recorded specimen was barely half this dimension. Apollo chirped urgently and pressed against Marcus's leg, then moved toward the pod. The other 2 hatchlings followed, their movements becoming more coordinated, almost ritualistic. They arranged themselves around the base of the pod in a triangular pattern, their heads bowed as if in reverence. Then Marcus heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. From within the pod came a low, harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate in his bones. Not the terrifying roar he'd expected, but something hauntingly beautiful, like whale song crossed with a cathedral organ. The communication array suddenly sprang to life, displays lighting up with data streams Marcus couldn't interpret. But the hatchlings could. They responded to the sound from the pod with their own soft harmonies, creating a complex musical dialogue that spoke of intelligence far beyond what any government scientist had ever suspected. Marcus activated his recording devices, knowing that what he was witnessing could change everything. The Draknari weren't just intelligent. They possessed a sophisticated form of communication that suggested advanced social structures and emotional depth. As he studied the readouts, pieces of a terrifying puzzle began falling into place. The pod wasn't just incubating another hatchling. According to the bioscanners, the life form inside was massive, but the brainwave patterns were unlike anything in the galactic database. This wasn't a typical Draknari. A new explosion rocked the station, this one so close that chunks of the ceiling crashed down around them. Marcus checked his chronometer. He had less than 5 minutes before the Zephyrian charges turned the entire research platform into an expanding cloud of superheated gas. "We have to go," he said to the hatchlings, but they remained fixed in their positions around the pod. Apollo looked at him with what Marcus could swear was desperation, then back at the massive egg. That's when Marcus understood. The hatchlings weren't just protecting the pod, they were trying to save whoever was inside. The harmonic communication, the coordinated positioning, the refusal to leave. They were performing some kind of awakening ritual. Marcus made a decision that went against every regulation in the book. Instead of trying to force the hatchlings to evacuate, he began examining the pod's life support systems. If there was truly an advanced being inside, someone with the intelligence to potentially bridge the gap between humans and Draknari, then saving them might be worth the risk. The bio readings were incredible. The creature inside the pod possessed neural complexity that dwarfed even the most advanced AI systems. Brain patterns suggested not just intelligence but wisdom, the kind that came from centuries of experience. This wasn't a hatchling at all, it was an elder, a Draknari elder that had somehow been preserved in stasis. Marcus's hands flew over the control panels, his years of xenobiology training finally proving useful for something beyond writing research reports. The awakening process was incredibly complex, requiring precise adjustments to atmospheric composition, temperature, and neural stimulation patterns. As he worked, the hatchlings continued their harmonic communication with the pod. Their songs grew more urgent and the response from within grew stronger. Whatever was inside was fighting to wake up, struggling against systems designed to keep it dormant. Another explosion. Closer still. Marcus could hear the groaning of metal as the station's superstructure began to fail. Warning lights bathed the chamber in hellish red as automated systems announced hull breaches on multiple levels. "Just a few more minutes," Marcus muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as he made final adjustments to the revival sequence. "Come on, work with me here." The pod's surface began to crack, hairline fractures spreading across its bioluminescent shell. The hatchling's songs reached a crescendo, and the answering call from within became a roar that vibrated through Marcus's entire body. Then the shell shattered. What emerged defied everything Marcus thought he knew about Draknari physiology. The being was enormous, easily 4 meters tall, but its movements were graceful rather than predatory. Its scales shifted through colors Marcus had never seen in nature, and its eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably ancient. But it was the expression on the creature's face that shocked Marcus most. Not rage or hunger or the killing instinct described in military briefings. Instead, he saw confusion, sadness, and something that looked remarkably like hope. The elder Draknari looked at the 3 hatchlings, who had stopped their singing and now approached with what could only be described as joy. Then those ancient eyes turned to Marcus, and he felt a presence touching the edges of his mind, not invasive or threatening, but curious and surprisingly gentle. When the elder spoke, its voice was like distant thunder, but the words it chose made Marcus's world tilt on its axis. "Human," it said in perfect if archaic galactic standard. "You have awakened me from the long sleep. Tell me, how fares the war between our peoples?" Marcus stared at the magnificent being before him, his mind reeling with implications. The Draknari could speak. They could think. They could feel. Everything the galaxy believed about them was wrong. But as the station shuddered toward its final destruction, Marcus realized that proving the truth would be far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. There were those who had invested too much in the war to allow peace to be possible. Dragon Hatchling Story. Part 3. The Draknari Elder moved with surprising speed for such a massive creature, its powerful claws tearing through the laboratory's reinforced walls like paper as the station continued its death spiral around them. Marcus found himself lifted gently in one enormous hand, while the 3 hatchlings clung to the elder's shoulders, their small forms dwarfed by their ancient protector. "The escape pods," Marcus gasped, pointing toward the emergency bay. "We need to reach the escape pods before the demolition charges detonate." The elder's head turned toward him, those impossibly old eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that made him feel exposed down to his soul. "Your people destroy their own research stations rather than allow truth to surface," the ancient being rumbled. "How very like them," There was no time to process the implications of that statement. The station lurched violently as another section was consumed by the systematic destruction, and Marcus felt his stomach drop as artificial gravity fluctuated. Emergency bulkheads were sealing throughout the station, designed to contain the damage but also trapping anyone still aboard. The Elder's massive form moved through the corridors with fluid grace, its scales rippling as it adapted to the changing environment. Where doorways were too small, it simply created new ones. Where debris blocked their path, it cleared the way with focused bursts of what Marcus could only describe as controlled energy. The neural link, Marcus said suddenly, his scientific mind still working, despite their desperate situation. The hatchlings were communicating with you through some kind of telepathic connection. That's how they knew where to find you. Not telepathic, the Elder corrected, its voice carrying easily over the sounds of destruction. Harmonic resonance. Our young are born with the ability to sense the song patterns of their elders. It is how knowledge passes from generation to generation, how we maintain our cultural memory. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's failing life support systems. Cultural memory. You have civilization, history, literature. We had, the Elder said quietly, before your galactic council declared us monsters unworthy of existence. They reached the emergency bay to find it already sealed, the escape pods long since launched. The massive space was filled with debris and twisted metal, the hull breaches visible as star-filled gaps in the station's skin. But the Elder didn't seem concerned. Instead, it moved toward what appeared to be a maintenance shaft, its scales shifting to a deep blue that seemed to resonate with something Marcus couldn't see. The three hatchlings began humming again, their voices joining in harmony with sounds coming from beyond the station's hull. What are they doing? Marcus asked, though part of him was beginning to understand. Calling for help. The Elder replied simply, Your people are not the only ones with ships in this system. Through the hull breaches, Marcus could see lights approaching, not the harsh white beams of human vessels, but softer, more organic illumination that pulsed in rhythm with the hatchling songs. As the lights drew closer, he realized they weren't ships at all, but living creatures, adult Draknari. A pod of them moving through space as easily as dolphins through water, their massive forms graceful despite their size. They responded to the harmonic calls with their own songs, creating a symphony that reverberated through the dying station's hull. Impossible, Marcus breathed. The vacuum of space. How do they survive? We are not bound by the same limitations as your kind, the Elder explained, beginning to hum along with the approaching pod. We evolved in the deep places between stars, where solar winds carry the songs of creation itself. Space is not emptiness to us, it is home. One of the approaching Draknari was larger than the others, its scales a deep gold that seemed to generate its own light. As it drew near the station, Marcus could see that its eyes held the same ancient wisdom as the Elder beside him. Thane Singer Vashtok, the Elder called out in its own language, then switched back to Galactic Standard for Marcus's benefit. My bondmate comes to retrieve us. The massive golden Draknari pressed against the station's hull, and Marcus watched in amazement as the metal seemed to flow around its touch, creating an opening large enough for all of them to pass through. The creature's body generated some kind of field that allowed atmosphere to remain stable even in the vacuum. Your people will hunt us, the Elder said, as they prepared to leave the doomed station. They will call us thieves and terrorists for taking you from their world. Then don't take me to your world, Marcus replied, surprising himself with his decisiveness. Take me to the neutral zone, to the diplomatic station on Kepler 442. There are people there who will listen, who might be willing to hear the truth. The Elder studied him with those ancient eyes. You would risk everything to speak for us? Your own kind will call you traitor. Marcus looked at the three hatchlings, who had saved his life by leading him to their Elder, and at the magnificent beings who had risked everything to rescue him from the destruction his own people had wrought. Some things are more important than loyalty to people who are wrong. As they passed through the bioluminescent barrier into the protective embrace of the golden Draknari's field, Marcus watched Research Station Omega-7 tear itself apart in a series of brilliant explosions. 3 years of work, countless scientific discoveries, and who knew how many other secrets were erased in moments. But the most important discovery was here with him now, swimming through space toward a destiny neither species had imagined possible. The elder's voice rumbled through the protective field as they traveled. Your name, young scientist. If we are to change the course of galactic history together, I should know what to call the human who dared to listen when others would only hear monsters. Marcus Chen, he replied, still struggling to process everything that had happened. And you? I am Corinth the Deep Singer, eldest of the Vashtok pod, keeper of the old songs and guardian of the hatchling dreams. The ancient being's eyes grew distant. I have slept for 3 of your centuries, waiting for one who might hear our true voice rather than the war songs your leaders taught us to sing. As they traveled through the starfield toward uncertain hope, Marcus began to understand the magnitude of what they were attempting. They weren't just trying to end a war. They were trying to heal a wound that had been festering for generations, built on misunderstandings and fear. The 3 hatchlings nestled close to him in the protective field, their trust absolute despite everything their species had suffered at human hands. In their innocent faith, Marcus found the strength he would need for the battles ahead. The truth was going to be much harder to sell than anyone imagined. Dragon Hatchling's Story, Part 4. The diplomatic station on Kepler 442 hung in space like a massive metallic flower, its rotating sections designed to accommodate the wildly different environmental needs of dozens of species. As their pod of Draknari approached the neutral facility, Marcus felt his stomach clench with anticipation and terror in equal measure. They're jamming communications, Corinth observed, his ancient voice carrying notes of concern. Your people do not wish us to speak to the diplomatic corps. Marcus watched through the bioluminescent field as sleek human warships moved to intercept them, their weapons systems charging with ominous purpose. He could identify the ship classes, Zephyrian destroyers, probably the same fleet that had just finished destroying Research Station Omega-7. This is Admiral Reeves of the Terran Defense Fleet, a harsh voice cut through space on all frequencies. You are harboring stolen human property and classified research materials. Surrender the rogue scientist immediately or face the consequences. Marcus felt a flash of anger at being called property, but Corinth's massive form seemed to vibrate with something far more dangerous. They speak of consequences, the elder rumbled. Perhaps it is time they learned what true consequences look like. The 3 hatchlings who had been playfully exploring the protective field around them suddenly grew still and alert. Their harmonic voices joined in a pattern Marcus hadn't heard before. Not the gentle communication songs, but something that resonated with primal power. Around them, the pod of adult Draknari began to spread out in formation. Marcus counted at least 20 of the massive beings, their scales shifting from peaceful blues and greens to warning crimsons and golds. They moved with military precision that spoke of countless years of experience fighting for their survival. Wait, Marcus called out, pressing his hands against Corinth's massive chest. Let me try to talk to them first. If we start shooting, we'll never convince anyone that your people want peace. Corinth's ancient eyes studied him with something that might have been surprise. You would stand between us and your own fleet? I'd stand between anyone and unnecessary violence, Marcus replied, though his voice shook slightly. Give me one chance to make them listen. The elder considered this for a long moment, then gestured to his podmates. The Draknari formation shifted, becoming less aggressive but no less ready for action. Corinth's harmonic voice carried new instructions that Marcus couldn't understand, but their meaning was clear. Hold position and wait. Marcus activated his personal communicator, knowing that Admiral Reeves would recognize his identification codes. Admiral, this is Dr. Marcus Chen. I'm requesting permission to dock at the diplomatic station and present evidence of critical importance to the Galactic Council. Chen? Reeves's voice crackled with static and fury. You're supposed to be dead. What the hell are you doing with those creatures? Learning the truth, Marcus replied. Admiral, what I've discovered changes everything we thought we knew about the Draknari. They're not the mindless predators we believed them to be. They're intelligent, they have culture, they have families. We've been fighting a war based on complete misunderstanding. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of weapon systems and the distant harmony of the Draknari pod. Marcus could imagine the emergency conferences taking place aboard the human ships, the frantic communications with command headquarters, the desperate attempts to figure out how to handle a situation no training manual had covered. Dr. Chen, came a new voice, smoother, more diplomatic. This is Ambassador Torres from the Kepler station. I'm authorizing emergency diplomatic immunity for your party. Dock at Base 7 and prepare for immediate debriefing. Ambassador, you don't have the authority, Admiral Reeves began. I have full authority under Section 12 of the Galactic Accords. Torres cut him off. Any being claiming to possess information relevant to interspecies conflict has the right to present their case before neutral arbitrators. Even if those beings happen to be our supposed enemies. Marcus felt a surge of hope. Ambassador Torres had always been known as a progressive voice in diplomatic circles, someone who believed in solving conflicts through understanding rather than firepower. But as they approached the docking bay, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Several of the human ships were moving into position around the station, not to protect it, but to threaten it. If the diplomatic hearing didn't go the way they wanted, they were prepared to destroy the evidence along with everyone who had heard it. Corinth, Marcus said quietly, I think we're walking into a trap. The ancient Draknari's scales shifted to deep purple, a color Marcus had learned indicated thoughtful analysis. Your people fear the truth more than they fear us, Corinth observed. This suggests they know at some level that their actions have been wrong. As they approached the docking bay, Marcus was amazed to see how the diplomatic station's engineers had managed to create an atmosphere pocket large enough to accommodate the massive Draknari forms. The three hatchlings pressed close to him, their earlier playfulness replaced by nervous energy as they sensed the tension around them. Ambassador Torres was waiting in the docking bay with a full diplomatic escort, representatives from a dozen different species, all looking various degrees of shocked as the pod of Draknari gracefully swam through the artificial atmosphere. The Zephyrian delegate was conspicuously absent. Dr. Chen, Torres approached with careful steps, her eyes fixed on the magnificent forms surrounding Marcus. I have to admit, this is not what I expected when I received your transmission. Ambassador, Marcus replied, then gestured toward Corinth. I'd like you to meet Corinth the Deep Singer, eldest of the Vashtak pod. He has information that could end the war between our peoples. Corinth lowered his massive head in what Marcus recognized as a formal bow. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in the very structure of the station. Honored Ambassador, I greet you in the name of all who sing the deep songs between stars. We come seeking not victory but understanding. The effect on the diplomatic assembly was immediate and profound. Several delegates stepped backward in shock, while others leaned forward with intense interest. The Draknari's obvious intelligence and formal bearing challenged everything they thought they knew about the species. But it was the small Centaurian delegate who asked the question everyone was thinking. If your people are capable of such eloquent communication, why have previous contact attempts resulted only in violence? Corinth's expression grew sad, his scales shifting to mournful blues. Because, Honored One, we were never given the chance to speak. Your fleets arrived with weapons charged and fire in their hearts, seeking to drive us from worlds we had called home for millennia. When beings approach you with intent to destroy, you respond in kind or you die. The truth hung in the air like a challenge to everything the galaxy had believed for generations. But Marcus could see doubt and fear warring with curiosity in the delegates' expressions. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered how long they would be allowed to live with such dangerous knowledge. Dragon Hatchling Story. Part 5. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the station's main amphitheater, a vast chamber designed to accommodate the radically different physiologies of its member species. Marcus sat at the witness table, feeling impossibly small beside Corinth's massive form, while the three hatchlings had positioned themselves protectively around his chair. The assembled delegates represented the full spectrum of galactic civilization, from the ethereal Cylani floating in their containment fields to the crystalline Vorthak whose thoughts manifested as prismatic light patterns. All of them stared at the Draknari with mixtures of fascination and fear. At the head of the chamber, Council Prime Valon called for order with his forearms raised in ceremonial gesture. This emergency session will address the claims presented by Dr. Marcus Chen regarding the cognitive status of the Draknari species. Dr. Chen, you may present your evidence. Marcus activated his presentation system, displaying 3 months of research data on the chamber's holographic projectors. Brain scans, behavioral analyses, communication patterns, everything he'd gathered during his time on the research station. "Honorable delegates," Marcus began, his voice steadier than he felt. "What you're seeing is comprehensive proof that the Draknari possess intelligence levels comparable to our most advanced species. They have complex social structures, cultural traditions, and emotional depth that we've completely failed to recognize." The Zephyrian military representative, General Crackstock, slammed his armored fist on his delegation's table. "This is propaganda designed to weaken our resolve. The Draknari are killers who have devastated 17 star systems. No amount of sympathetic analysis can change the death toll they've created." But it was Corinth who responded, his ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries. "General, we grieve for every life lost in this senseless conflict. But ask yourself, when your fleets arrived at our nursery worlds with weapons blazing, what choice did we have but to defend our young?" The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Marcus pulled up stellar cartographic data, highlighting the systems where major battles had occurred. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, every major confrontation between human forces and Draknari has taken place in systems containing gas giant planets with the atmospheric conditions necessary for Draknari reproduction. We weren't defending ourselves from raiders, we were attacking their families." A ripple of disturbed murmurs swept through the assembly. The Centaurian delegates' bioluminescent patterns flickered with what Marcus recognized as distress. "Are you suggesting that the entire war began as a result of misinterpretation?" Apollo, the largest of the three hatchlings, chose that moment to hop up onto Marcus's lap with a soft chirping sound. The gesture was so completely non-threatening, so obviously affectionate, that several delegates visibly relaxed. "The first rule of xenobiology," Marcus said, gently stroking Apollo's scales, "is that behavior without context is meaningless. These beings aren't monsters. They're parents protecting their children." General Crackstock stood abruptly, his mechanical enhancements whirring with aggression. "Even if this is true, it changes nothing. They have the power to destroy entire fleets. They cannot be allowed to expand unchecked throughout the galaxy." "Unchecked?" Corinth's voice carried dangerous undertones that made the chamber's walls vibrate. "General, in the 3 centuries before your species discovered us, we had established colonies in exactly 7 star systems. 7 in a galaxy containing billions of worlds. Does this speak to you of aggressive expansion?" The Silani delegate's voice drifted through her translation matrix like wind chimes. "If the Draknari are indeed peaceful by nature, why do they possess such formidable combat capabilities?" Corinth's expression grew thoughtful, his scales shifting through contemplative purples. "Honored Silani, your own people developed faster than light travel technology. Do you use it only for warfare? Or do you also explore, trade, and spread beauty throughout the stars?" "We use it for peaceful purposes," the Silani replied. "As do we use our natural abilities," Corinth continued. "The power to move between stars, to survive in the void, to reshape matter with harmonic resonance. These gifts were never intended for destruction. But when peaceful beings are attacked, they must become warriors or cease to exist." Marcus could see the tide of opinion beginning to shift in the chamber. The evidence was overwhelming, and Corinth's obvious intelligence and wisdom were impossible to deny. But he also noticed General Crackstock speaking urgently into his private communicator. Ambassador Torres leaned forward from the council's advisory position. "Corinth the Deep Singer, if your people desire peace, what assurances can you offer that past hostilities will not resume?" The ancient Draknari looked toward his 3 young companions, who had begun humming softly, not in alarm but in what Marcus had learned to recognize as contentment. "I offer you the greatest assurance any being can give," Corinth rumbled. "I offer you our children." He gestured toward the hatchlings with one massive claw. "These young ones have bonded with Dr. Chen, a human. They trust him completely. Despite everything our 2 species have suffered. If the young can learn to trust, perhaps their elders can learn to forgive." The simple profundity of the statement seemed to resonate through the chamber. Marcus could see tears in the eyes of several delegates, and even the usually stoic Vorthax crystal patterns had shifted to warm, hopeful hues. But then the chamber's emergency alarms began blaring, and Admiral Reeves's voice cut through the proceedings. "Council Prime, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've detected Draknari reinforcements jumping into the system. Massive formations, possibly preparing for attack. I'm implementing emergency protocols." Through the chamber's viewports, Marcus could see the distant flashes of ships dropping out of hyperspace. Not just a few vessels, but dozens of them. Massive Draknari bioships that dwarfed even the largest human dreadnoughts. The mood in the chamber shifted instantly from hope to terror. Several delegates began calling for immediate evacuation, while others demanded that the Draknari delegation be arrested as enemy infiltrators. But Marcus noticed something the others had missed. The three hatchlings weren't showing fear or excitement at the arrival of their people's fleet. Instead, they seemed confused, their harmonic voices carrying notes of concern and uncertainty. Corinth's massive head tilted as he listened to sounds beyond human hearing. His scales shifted to deep warning red as his expression grew grim. "Those are not my people," the ancient Draknari said quietly. "Those are the exile clans, Draknari who have embraced the path of war and conquest your leaders taught us to follow. They come not to make peace, but to ensure it never becomes possible." Marcus felt his heart sink as he realized the truth. The war had created monsters on both sides, and those monsters had too much invested in conflict to allow understanding to take root. The real battle for peace was just beginning. Dragon Hatchling Story, Part 6. The diplomatic station shuddered as massive forms moved past its hull. The Exile Clan bioships were unlike anything Marcus had seen in his research. Where Corinth's people moved with grace and purpose, these creatures seemed twisted by rage and pain, their natural bioluminescence corrupted into angry reds and venomous purples. "Council Prime," Admiral Reeves's voice crackled over the communication system, barely controlled panic evident in his tone. "The unknown Draknari vessels are not responding to any communication attempts. They're moving into attack formation around the station." In the chamber, chaos erupted as delegates shouted for evacuation or demanded immediate military response. But Marcus noticed that Corinth had grown very still. His ancient eyes closed as he listened to harmonics beyond human perception. The three hatchlings had pressed themselves against Marcus's legs, their small bodies trembling with distress. Their usual harmonious voices had become discordant, filled with notes that spoke of fear and confusion. "They sing the war songs," Corinth said quietly, his voice barely audible above the panic in the chamber. "Songs of vengeance and eternal struggle. Songs we learned from your people's actions but should never have embraced." Through the viewport, Marcus could see the exile vessels positioning themselves between the diplomatic station and the human fleet. They were preparing to fight, but not against the station. They were protecting it from Admiral Reeves's ships. "I don't understand," Ambassador Torres said, her diplomatic training allowing her to maintain composure, even as emergency klaxons wailed around them. "Why would they shield us from our own fleet?" Corinth's massive head turned toward her, his scales shifting to colors Marcus had never seen before. Deep golds shot through with silver, like starlight on precious metal. "Because, honored ambassador, they do not wish us to make peace. The exile clans have found purpose in eternal war. They fear nothing more than the possibility of understanding between our peoples." The communication system crackled to life with a new voice, deeper than Corinth's, filled with harmonics that spoke of rage and loss. The translation matrix struggled with the alien concepts before finally producing words. "Ancient One who speaks with soft scales, you shame the memory of our burned nursery worlds. The quick death species has taken our young, destroyed our song nests, turned the void cold with their violence. There can be no harmony where there has been only discord." Corinth rose to his full impressive height, his voice carrying new authority as he responded in his own language. The harmonic exchange that followed was unlike anything Marcus had witnessed. Not the gentle songs of communication he'd observed before, but something that resonated with the fundamental forces of creation itself. The three hatchlings began to sing along, their young voices adding unexpected harmony to Corinth's deep tones. Marcus didn't understand the words, but he felt the meaning in his bones. A song of hope, of possibility, of young beings who had learned to trust despite everything their species had suffered. The effect on the exile clans was immediate and profound. The angry bioluminescence of their vessels flickered, shifting toward uncertainty. The war songs they had been projecting grew quieter, as if the hatchlings' innocent voices had reminded them of something they had tried to forget. "Corinth is telling them about us," Marcus realized aloud. "About the bonds that have formed, about the possibility of a different path." But even as hope began to bloom, Admiral Reeves made the decision that would change everything. I won't allow alien creatures to dictate terms to the human fleet. All vessels prepare for bombardment. Target the largest bioship first. Admiral, no. Ambassador Torres shouted into her communicator. You'll destroy any chance of peaceful resolution. The human fleet's weapon systems charged with deadly purpose. Their targeting lasers painting the exile vessels with marks of impending destruction. Marcus could see the largest of the bioships, a massive creature scarred by centuries of warfare, begin to glow with defensive energy. But it was Apollo who acted first. The small hatchling leaped from Marcus's lap and spread his tiny wings Marcus hadn't even known he possessed. In the low gravity of the station, Apollo managed to glide toward the chamber's communication array, his small claws somehow interfacing with systems designed for much larger beings. Suddenly, Apollo's voice filled every communication channel in the system, human, Draknari, and diplomatic alike. Not words, but pure harmony, the song of a young being who had learned to trust across species lines. The effect was electric. On the human ships, soldiers who had been preparing for battle found themselves hesitating as the hatchling's innocent melody touched something deep in their hearts. On the exile vessels, ancient beings who had known only war for centuries heard echoes of the songs their own young had once sung. "My God," whispered one of the Centaurian delegates, "it's beautiful." Apollo's song was joined by his two companions, then by Corinth's deeper harmonies, then by voices from the exile vessels as older Draknari remembered what they had been before war had consumed their lives. The music that filled space around the diplomatic station spoke of loss and hope, of mistakes and possibilities, of the simple truth that even the most bitter enemies could choose a different path. Marcus watched through the viewport as something miraculous occurred. The exile vessels began to shift their formations, no longer preparing for battle but creating something that looked almost like a protective embrace around both the diplomatic station and the human fleet. Admiral Reeves's voice came over the communications one final time, but now it carried notes of uncertainty rather than aggression. "All ships, stand down. Repeat, all ships stand down. We are receiving a communication from the unknown vessels." The translation came through moments later, the exile leader's voice heavy with the weight of centuries. "Ancient One, your young ones sing the old songs, the songs from before the burning began. Perhaps it is time to remember why we once sang it all." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he realized what was happening. The hatchlings hadn't just saved the day. They had saved the possibility of a future where both species could exist without fear. But as the immediate crisis passed, Marcus knew the real work was just beginning. Peace would require more than beautiful songs and good intentions. It would require the hardest thing of all, the willingness to forgive. Dragon Hatchling Story, Part 7. 6 months after the Kepler Station Accords were signed, Marcus stood in the observation deck of the New Harmony Research Center, watching 3 young Draknari play with human children in the zero-gravity recreation sphere below. Apollo had grown considerably, his scales now showing the deep emerald coloration of approaching maturity, but his bond with Marcus remained as strong as ever. The facility floated in neutral space, jointly operated by human scientists and Draknari songkeepers, dedicated to understanding how 2 radically different species could not just coexist, but thrive together. It represented something the galaxy had never seen before, true interspecies collaboration. "Dr. Chen," came a familiar, harmonious voice behind him. Corinth approached, his massive form moving with the careful grace he'd developed when working around smaller beings. "The Council has reached a decision regarding the exile clans." Marcus turned from the viewport, noting that the ancient Draknari scales had taken on new patterns since the peace talks began, gold and silver threads that spoke of hope cautiously nurtured. "What did they decide?" "Rehabilitation rather than punishment," Corinth rumbled, settling his bulk against a specially designed support structure. "The exile vessels will be given sanctuary worlds where they can relearn the deep songs, where their young can grow up without the burden of inherited hatred." Through the transparent aluminum walls, Marcus could see one of those rehabilitation worlds in the distance, a gas giant with the perfect atmospheric conditions for Draknari reproduction. Human engineering teams were working alongside Draknari biosculptors to create orbital habitats that could house both species comfortably. The success hadn't been easy or immediate. In the early days after Kepler Station, there had been incidents, human colonies that refused to accept Draknari neighbors, exile clans that launched revenge attacks against shipping lanes, politicians on both sides who built careers on maintaining fear and mistrust. But gradually, through the patient work of beings like Ambassador Torres and Corinth, through the innocent friendships formed by young members of both species, through the simple power of individuals choosing understanding over fear, the galaxy began to change. The hatchlings have been asking about visiting Earth, Marcus said, watching Apollo perform an intricate aerial dance with a group of human children, their laughter mixing with his harmonic songs. They want to see the homeworld of their first human friend. Corinth's expression grew thoughtful. And what did you tell them? That Earth isn't ready yet, Marcus admitted. There are still too many people who see your species as monsters. But maybe someday, perhaps, Corinth agreed. Change comes slowly to old worlds and older minds. But it does come, given patience and hope. A soft chime announced an incoming communication. The holographic display activated to show Admiral Reeves, no longer the aggressive military commander from 6 months ago, but a thoughtful man who had become one of the most effective advocates for interspecies cooperation. Dr. Chen Corinth. Reeves nodded respectfully. I have news from the Vega sector. The mining consortium has agreed to share extraction rights with the Draknari community there, in exchange for help with deep space navigation through the asteroid fields. It was another small victory in the ongoing process of learning to share a galaxy. Human technology and efficiency combined with Draknari wisdom and their natural ability to survive in space had proven to be an incredibly powerful partnership. And the military situation? Marcus asked, though he was hopeful he already knew the answer. Down to isolated incidents, Reeves replied. The Joint Patrol Program is working better than anyone expected. It turns out, human tactical thinking and Draknari spatial awareness complement each other remarkably well. As the communication ended, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that terrifying moment in the research station when 3 small hatchlings had refused to abandon him, to this new reality where children of both species played together among the stars. Apollo chose that moment to glide up to the observation deck, having mastered the facility's air currents with typical Draknari grace. He settled against Marcus's shoulder with a contented chirp, his scales warm against human skin. The young ones want to know when you'll teach them more human words, Apollo said, his voice now carrying the deeper harmonics of approaching maturity, while retaining the playful curiosity that had saved them all. Tell them we'll start tomorrow, Marcus replied, scratching behind the ridge where Apollo's neck met his skull in the spot he'd learned was particularly pleasant for young Draknari. But first they need to finish their harmonic mathematics lessons with Songkeeper Vashtok. The easy blend of human and Draknari education had become one of the most exciting aspects of the new piece. Young humans were learning to think in 4 dimensions and communicate through harmonic resonance, while Draknari hatchlings developed analytical skills and technological aptitude that complemented their natural abilities. Dr. Chen, Corinth rumbled quietly. There is something else. The deep archives on our homeworld have been opened for the first time in millennia. The Songkeepers believe they contain historical records that could help both our peoples understand how this conflict truly began. Marcus felt a familiar thrill of scientific discovery. Are you asking if I'd like to be part of the research team? I am asking if you would like to be the first human ever to visit the Draknari homeworld and hear the songs that contain our entire history, Corinth replied. It would be dangerous. There are still those among my people who view humans with suspicion, but the knowledge gained could prevent future misunderstandings. Looking down at the children playing below, watching human and Draknari young learning from each other, with the casual ease that only the innocent possessed, Marcus felt the weight of possibility. When do we leave? He asked. As Apollo began to hum with excitement and Corinth's scales shifted to the deep golds of profound satisfaction, Marcus realized that his warning about not approaching the predator dragon hatchlings had been exactly wrong. The hatchlings hadn't been dangerous because they were predators. They had been dangerous because they possessed something far more powerful than claws and teeth. They had the ability to trust, to hope, and to believe that even the most different beings could choose to understand each other, rather than fear what they didn't comprehend. In the end, that had made all the difference in the galaxy.